Hello, my beautiful friends. It's Amanda here, and today I'm doing another Zodiac makeup video for you. I've done quite a few of these over the years. Most recently, I did the perfect red lip for every Zodiac sign. Today, I want to do a new take on a video that I did several years ago. It was actually a video series. I did BYOPs, that's build your own palettes, for all the different signs, and I want to revisit that idea, but with a new focus. That series I did with all ColourPop singles, and I also did those broken up by element. So I did all the fire signs together, all the earth signs. Today I want to speed run through the different palettes, but I also want to focus on my indie singles. I'm definitely going to be drawing a lot from my Fantasy Cosmetica palettes, especially because in my Enchanted Autumn palette, I literally have Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius shades. Lately, I've just been on a Fantasy Cosmetica palette remix kick anyway. I've done a couple of purely Fantasy Cosmetica videos that I'll link down in the description if you're curious to see more palettes that I've come up with using their single shadows. I kind of air quotes that their palettes are magnetic, so you can remove the single shadows. They just really lend themselves to the remix idea. But I didn't want to box myself in using just one brand. It will be heavily Fantasy Cosmetica, but you'll probably see another few indies mixed in there as well. So let's get to the fun part. I'm going to take you through my shade selection process and actually building and swatching the palettes. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. So let's go build some palettes.
When I set about creating all of these zodiac sign palettes, I wanted to honor the traditional colors that each sign is associated with, but I decidedly did not want to do monochromatic palettes. Aries is a really powerful sign with a really powerful color. Of course, I'm talking about the color red. So my main objective was to curate a palette that would celebrate the color red by placing two really bold red shades in the very center of the palette. Shades Ring of Fire, which is the shimmery duochrome shade from Cleona Cosmetics, and then the really, really bright matte red shade called Sangre. And then I surrounded those colors with a bunch of shadows that can support a huge variety of very red-centric looks, but they would still be able to exude that Aries energy, even without literally using the reds in this palette. For example, that deep green shade called Necromancer and the really smoky purple color called Might from the Fighter palette could create super intense, sultry, sexy, smoky looks that's very Aries. And then the bolder pink shades and purple shades like Ensnare, Dogwood, Empower, and that really super shimmery duochrome multichrome shade from Terra Moons called Aurora Australis are all red adjacent shades on the color wheel. Things like pink and purple will be red adjacent. And most importantly, they have that same attention grabbing quality that our Aries needs. There are some signs that really demand a bold pop of color or an unexpected contrasting color. That's why I chose green Necromancer to go in here. And I think Aries is definitely one of those signs. One thing that I want to mention early on in this video is that for all of these individual shadows, you're going to see the shade name written in the bottom left-hand corner, printed there on the screen. And then underneath each shade name, you're either going to see the brand name Terra Moons, the brand name Sydney Grace, or you will see the name of a Fantasy Cosmetica palette. So if it says anything other than Terra Moons or Sydney Grace, then it's a palette name instead of a brand name. I know that can be a little bit confusing. I'm going to leave all the lists in the description box too, but I wanted to clear that up because I know it is just kind of ambiguous. Of course, if I misspelled or mislabeled anything, please let me know. I will do my best to clear that up. There are just so many moving parts. I've been working on this video for so long, and working on the different palettes, keeping shade name lists, keeping kind of an outline of my thinking so that I can explain it all to you, and then labeling them on screen, it's just highly likely that I'm going to accidentally misspell or maybe even mislabel something. I have been checking and combing over this as I've been working on this, but just let me know. I'd rather know and try to clear it up if possible. All right, so that is our Aries palette. Let's move on to the next sign, which is Taurus. Now, the color for Taurus is green, and Taurus is an earth sign. So I think that the default often is a green and brown, more muted, mossy earth tones approach to a Taurus color story. But to me, I think that feels a little flat, just a little too boring. No offense, honestly. I like a little green and brown moment too. But Taurus season is all about growth, progress. It is pure springtime. So I really wanted to choose shades that honored that earthy green and brown idea by choosing shades like this matte green, Lonleaf Pine, and I also chose a matte green called Forest from the Druid palette. And then there are a couple of more brownish neutrals like Chestnut from Terra Moons and Luna from my Enchanted Autumn palette. But I wanted to bring those earthy shades to life with some brighter and softer shades. So the bright chartreuse tones in Hot Spiced Cider, another Terra Moons single, and the shade Ambition from the Harvest of Souls palette, those remind me of that vibrant look of a brand new seedling bursting forth or a new bud that's just on the verge of opening up. And I also wanted to add some pinky shades because not only do those pink colors on the top row, Dusk and Patron, feel really springtime, they tie into that fresh, flowery springtime vibe. But I also think that a Taurus palette really needs a softness. Yes, they are known for being very grounded earth signs and stubborn as bulls, but that doesn't mean that they are completely without softness. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm married to a Taurus. But have you ever read the book Ferdinand the Bull? It's been around forever. It's a super old children's book and it's really, really cute. I think that all Taurians are some percentage Ferdinand. It's true, Taurus is known for being a bit stubborn. But the flip side of that coin is that they are very, very loyal, dedicated, hardworking. So we need some reliable, hardworking, staple neutrals, especially in a matte formula, to provide that really consistent go-to base for any eye look that you can add a shimmer to and switch it up pretty easily there. This sign is also known to be quite sensual, very interested in luxury and the good things in life. So we need to balance those stable, staple neutrals with some really sexy, shifty, shiny shades to add a luxe feel to the overall palette. These can be switched up and layered with the mattes so that you can create a very customized eye look, whether you want that staple neutral type of look or something a little bit romantic, a little bit more sexy. The Taurus can do it all, so they need a palette that can do it all. Gemini is up next, and the central color for Gemini is yellow. But I think that the Gemini palette as a whole just needs to be very warm and bright to pay homage to that yellow shade. While I did choose just one very bright primary yellow to build this color story around, I did also pair that with a lot of yellow adjacent shades, much like I did with the Aries palette, using pinks and purples to enhance the red. For this Gemini palette, I chose a lot of oranges and browns with a strong golden undertone or a gold shift, like that first shade from Cleona called Flare, the Sydney Grace single called Haystack, which is a really goldeny neutral shade. And this shade called Regrowth from the Druid palette, which is a really reddish brown with a ton of gold shimmer that plays beautifully off of this bold primary yellow shade. And I continued the theme of yellow adjacent shades with some very yellowy greens, like that shimmer on the top row called Schemes from the Harvest of Souls. And there's also a very bright yellowy chartreuse green shimmer on the bottom row called Ritual. Because Gemini is known for being very versatile and very open minded, I think that a perfect Gemini palette needs to be able to do a lot of different looks and would never shy away from bold and unexpected color combinations. So I chose to include a very high contrast shade in the last blue matte shade called Cunning from the Rogue palette. And I think that the pale pastel type green Poison from the Harvest of Souls that's right next to that bright yellow, I think that's also very unexpected. So the end result of this palette is something quirky yet versatile, user friendly. It could easily give you a pick two shades every day, just throw on a matte in the crease and a shimmer on the lid, approachable, easy peasy type of look, but you could just as easily create something really bold by adding a lot of colors, or even just creating something that's very graphic looking by using these high contrast colors like that primary yellow, and then the very dark blue is going to give somewhat unexpected graphic look. And that's really what I was going for with this palette, because I want to honor the charming, curious, friendly, multifaceted Gemini. So this palette needs to be very charming, quirky, inspiring, and also able to be a lot of things in a lot of different situations. And I think that this color story ultimately ended up communicating a lot of that. When I was going through building all of these palettes, the Gemini palette is the one that I struggled with the most, but ultimately I'm really, really happy with how this turned out. Now let's move over to the Cancer palette. The colors linked with the sign of the Cancer are white and silver, which make a lot of sense for the zodiac sign that is so often linked with both the moon and water. Think about moonlight on the ocean. But I also think that the association with white and silver can lend to an overall color palette for Cancers typically that is a little flat or just kind of one dimensional with lots of super light shades, really whispery pastel colors. In my opinion, the color story most definitely needs to reflect the depth and complexity that our emotional Cancers are known for. Now, of course, I still felt like I needed to include those super light white and silvery shades on the top row there, especially the first three shades, Europa, Curiosity, and the shade Crystal from Cradled in Ice. But this is the first shade I was drawn to when curating the color story. This super shifty, high foiled single shadow called Stellar Apotheosis from Terra Moons. This was my jumping off point for the entire palette because the soft blue base with that really dynamic multi-chrome shift captured the essence of all of the inspiration I was taking for this palette, shifting phases of the moon, movement of water. So really that entire top row and then the cool silvery tones in the middle row, that cool purpley gray heron from the Enchanted Autumn palette, and then the more classic silver blade from the Fighter palette are in line with the more classic colors of the sign. But I wanted to add depth to this color story. That was really important for me. So, layer, graviturgy, and intellect, these last three shades, all represent that emotional depth that Cancers are known for. I just imagine layering all of these shades and finishes together, constantly changing the colors, like our moody, creative, emotional little crabby Cancer friends. No shade. I love all of you. I love my Cancer friends. And honestly, I think that this is one of my favorite palettes that I made for this video. This is the type of color story that I would like to create for myself and use in my day to day. When I'm designing any of these palettes, I'm not simply focused on the colors and the symbolism. I'm also trying to fit that into the framework of creating a palette that could actually be used and worn. I really like to focus on having a variety of finishes. Also, often I really like to have a variety of depth, and I want the colors to make sense together in a way that I could pick out shades and create actual eye looks that I really think people would like to wear beyond just the confines of the more simplified, red for Aries, white and silver for Cancer. I wanted to make real eye looks for real people. Now we're moving on to Leo, the lion, definitely known for being a very bold, courageous, confident sign. Leos are the best. They will not hesitate to let everyone know it. It's no wonder that the color associated with Leo is gold. It's the color of the sun, of royalty, of power and prestige. Gold really grabs attention and it's flashy, but it's also really warm, like our little generous, warm hearted Leos. We need a really warm, bright, and bold color story for this sign. I chose to do a few varieties of actual gold for my Leo palette. The soft golden shift in that shade Meteor from the Wizard palette, the more muted golden matte eyeshadow Valor from the Fighter palette, and then a really bright classic gold metallic called Strike from the Monk palette. Really classic golds. Then I felt that this Leo palette definitely needed a bold metallic red. So my mind immediately went to the single shadow called Spiked from Terra Moons. To me, the combo of red and gold, that spiked and strike shade combination, just screams regal luxury. I am rich and powerful, which is exactly the vibe that a Leo palette demands. But because Leo is associated with the sun, I also drew a lot of color inspiration from a sunset. You know, that time of day when the sky is so strangely orange and pink that you can't help but just look at it. I know we have all had that picture on our phone trying to capture the sky. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think that is also a very Leo vibe in the best way. So I added these really intense, vibrant sunset colors like Energy from the Monk palette and Innate and Firestorm, those bright, bright pinks from the Sorcerer palette. What we end up with is a color story that could certainly turn out a few really classic gold looks that are a bit more traditional, something that you could get from other palettes, probably warm tone neutral palettes in your collection. But this same palette can also give us something really bold and flashy and attention grabbing. That's what a Leo palette needs. Leo is going to lead the charge. Leo is going to do it all. And I think that a Leo needs a palette that can keep up with that pace. And I'm very happy with this finished product. When I see it all swatched together, I'm definitely getting that vibrant sunset inspiration, but there's also the classic regal royal type of inspiration as well. And I hope that the Leos will find this take refreshing, not just what I traditionally think of, like gold and orangey brown combo, which is nice. And I think you could do that with this palette. But there's also a lot more. Leo needs some pizzazz, and this palette definitely has it. The final palette for part one is the sixth sign, and that's Virgo. The Virgo palette is one that I worked on and tweaked for a long time compared to some of the other signs, where I felt like the palettes, for example, for Leo and Cancer, kind of built themselves. They came together in my brain really easily. But for the Virgo palette, I spent a lot more time perfecting my shade selections, which almost feels a little too on the nose for our hardworking, detail oriented, very perfectionist Virgo. This is an earth sign and it's associated with classic natural and neutral colors, very grounded browns and greens. So, my challenge with the Virgo palette is twofold. First, to make sure that it's distinct from the Taurus palette, which is also an earth sign, also associated with greens and browns. And secondly, I really wanted to create a Virgo palette that isn't boring, but still honors the original intent of those natural neutral shades. I know that Virgos have historically been saddled with some pretty boring makeup in the past from Zodiac themed releases. And I don't think that neutrals are always boring by any means, but I did want to focus on doing something a bit different for Virgo this time around. So I certainly had to include those stable neutral shades. I can't completely reinvent the wheel. I feel like I would be losing the spirit of this challenge if I went for an all out, like, colorful rainbow palette for Virgo. So my Virgo palette is grounded with shades like Dusk and Root from the Druid palette, and those deeper neutral mattes like Heron and Chestnut. And then those staple neutrals are paired with a couple of earthy greens and some shades that I like to call neutrals with a twist, like the pale silvery lavender color on the top row, or the duochrome called Transformation from the Druid palette. That one is a brown base and it has a golden green shift. So it is and isn't neutral at the same time. It reads as neutral at first glance, but there's so much more going on. Just like a Virgo who might seem overly analytical or something, but they definitely aren't robotic. A trait Virgos don't get enough recognition for, in my mind, is that they tend to be good at creative or artistic endeavors. And a big part of that is that Virgos are known for being quite good at making other people feel understood. So, my hope is that this palette would be easy to use and easy for anyone to understand. I think that this color story looks straightforward at first glance, but it has a capacity for a lot of interesting yet still approachable looks. We're honoring the neutrals without sacrificing the ability to do more creative looks when the time is right, just like we know our Virgo would. Now, I have to apologize here because I ended up having to split this video into two different videos. Just the number of files was overwhelming my editing software. So I'm going to put part two up as soon as humanly possible. Here's a little preview of the Libra palette, which is the next one on our Zodiac palette journey. And I'm also going to include a link on the end screen right here so that you can click straight to part two. Apologies for having to break it up. I know sometimes that's annoying, a bit of a letdown. So I will have part two ready for you as soon as humanly possible. And I love your face so much. Okay, thank you. See you soon. Love you. Watch part two. Thanks. Bye.